Good morning, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest iteration of the Indica Books Open House with Otis. Given by the number of people who are attending, it is great that we are getting writing pieces from a broader group of people interested in improving their writing, getting feedback on their writing, and in general also getting to interact with other like-minded people. So very briefly, and since there are a few new people, I will take a minute or two to go over I'll do a basic quick introduction, right? So this, as the name suggests, is a writer's open house, and Indica Books, along with Indica or Indica Academy, hosts this, and we have Otis with us, who joins us every Sunday. And this is how it works, right? So all of you already obviously know this, but for those of you who might end up watching this on YouTube, we invite you to send short writing pieces to Otis. 750, 800 words is the generally recommended limit. You send it in as a PDF format document, and Otis will review it. He'll mark up his feedback, suggestions, or whatever else comments that he wants to put on that PDF document and send it back to you. Then when we convene on Sunday, every Sunday, he will take those pieces that have been submitted in the last week, and the deadline is generally make sure you send it by Friday your time so that he has at least a couple of days to go over it. Obviously, the earlier you send it, the more the chances that those will be covered in the following Sunday. And when we convene, he will go over those writing pieces one by one, spending anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour or more, depending on what point of writing that he chooses to elaborate on, using your writing piece as a framework or as a starting point. And it's open to all, so you get to see some pieces of the submissions that other writers have made, and you can engage with Otis. You can ask questions. You can engage and discuss with other participants also here. And we do put up this video on YouTube in a few days after the recording becomes available. There is a WhatsApp group in case you're interested to continue the conversation. It is strictly optional. I will share the link in the chat session in a little bit. And finally, very importantly, I also strongly encourage you to go take a look at the Indica Academy site. I'll share the link. Do take a look at it and see what the philosophical underpinnings of Indica Books is. So that will help you better decide if this is a forum where you want to share your writing pieces, or you think you might be better served in finding some other platform. So with that preamble, I will turn this over to you, Otis.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. All right. Let's, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 6 pieces. So that means generally, if we're looking at 2 hours, 2 hours divided by 6 is, a little less than 15 per piece. So is that right? No, it isn't. Okay, good. I'm not a mathematician. Okay, don't judge. All right. Ram, let's, you stepping up last week when we had few pieces, sent in 2 pieces. So let's start with you. We have your second piece still. We appreciate that. And I really appreciate your commitment to the workshop. You're like, there are not enough pieces. Well, I'm both going to submit more pieces, and I will get other people to submit pieces. We're going to get some work done because, well, anyway, I really appreciate
that's the easy part, Otis. The feedback you give, the amount of time and effort you spend, I think we are all very lucky to be getting your feedback.
Oh, well, thank you. So this piece, I'm refreshing my own memory, so I'll sort of go over the plot of it. We basically have a business person of some kind trying to gain access to a loan officer and acquire a loan. So maybe you could just let's see. Oh, sorry, I haven't shared yet, but I will. Okay, Abhinav, I need access to screen share. Okay, thank you. We're getting so good at this. Okay. Ram, can you see the beginning? Maybe you could just read the start.
From the beginning till here? Okay. Deepak stopped drumming his fingers on the frayed armrest of the stained sofa and smoothed his thinning hair. He flicked his wrist to see the time. Again. It's been over half an hour, he thought. He walked across to the secretary's desk. Madam, it's been over half an hour. Can you please inform Sharmaji that I'm waiting? The secretary, in her 50s, looked over the edge of her acetate frame spectacles. Sir, as I already told you before, I have informed Sharmaji. Sharma Sahib is the bank's regional manager, and as you can see, he is a very busy man. She waved her arm around the lobby where several people sat on the sofas, an expectant look on their faces and thick files in their hands. You have to wait, sir, she declared and went back to typing on her computer. Deepak sighed and went back to his place on the sofa. A liveried peon walked in and out of Sharmaji's cabin, carrying cups of steaming tea and trays of biscuits. Deepak leaned forward to pick up the paper cup, half full with water, but stopped. He didn't want to be in the restroom when his turn came. He leaned back and looked around. What the secretary said was true. There were half a dozen people clutching thick files of project reports and proposals, waiting. Some of them had already been there when he arrived. Deepak clutched the file in his hand more tightly, mentally rehearsing the arguments to convince the manager to give him more time to service the loan. His argument boiled down to two words. Please, Sharmaji.
Okay. Thank you, Ram. Ram, let me ask you the question. What do you think what do you think works in this piece? What do you think that you've done here that really works?
So the one thing that I think works in this is that there is a fair amount of detail that if I have to look at it as a reader, that makes it possible for me to imagine the setting. So the kind of place that is, etc. So I think that works. When I look back,
let me just pause you there. Okay, so I want to just underscore that for everyone. Yes, that definitely works. So like when I start reading this, I start seeing the scene, basically. I mean, that is happening for me. I see this scene. I see this person, and I see this situation. I see that there's even some action going on. He's drumming his fingers. He's looking at his watch. I'm getting it. That is no small thing, Ram. I just want us all to dwell on that is a fantastic base from which to operate. That we actually perceive the scene based on the detail and your commitment to writing about the action that's taking place. And for those of you who have been here for a while, you understand, and not writing about the action, mark my words, that is not taking place. Right? Is that sinking in? You're writing about the action that is taking place, and you're not writing about the action that is not taking place, right? The backstory, the explanation for the action. I mean, you have some explanation for the action or you're working it in. We'll talk about that in a second. But really, that's a tremendous base. And I'm really going to, going back to drama, you're writing as if it's a play. I can see the play unfolding in front of my eyes, or I can see the movie unfolding in front of my eyes with characters in action. No small thing. Okay, what else were you going to say, Ram?
So that works, but reading at least the first page, I can understand as a reader that, okay, this chap is in some amount of trouble. There is something that is bothering him, but I don't know what that is. So that is not very clear. So what is outside is coming out very clearly, but what is going on inside of him, that is not coming out very clearly so far.
Okay, wonderful. That's fantastic analysis of this piece, I think, from my point of view. So, Ram, what do we call, this is kind of a test, what do we call the action, right, the conflict that we're seeing here portrayed? What do we call that? What's the name that we apply to that?
Setup.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to lead so much. That's terrible. But external conflict.
Yeah, external
That's the
conflict, of
external
course. Yeah, yeah.
conflict,
This is the
right?
external conflict. Yeah,
And you're describing
yeah,
yourself what is basically absent here. Yes, we get what is happening, but we do not have any understanding of why it's happening. The why, or why it's happening, why it's important. In fact, in a sense, the skin in the game. You know, why does it
yeah,
matter to Deepak? You know,
yeah.
what's the and that so that's the internal conflict, the internal struggle, and that's also the struggle that the reader identifies with, right?
Right.
Because and it must be a universal struggle that they have, you know, a human struggle.
Yeah.
So it has to go out to a broad level. It's not a specific. This is the external conflict is specific. And ideally, it should be unique. This external conflict is not terribly unique. It's a little bit pedestrian. So it lacks a little bit in that uniqueness. But we'll see that with the external conflict and the internal conflict, which I do suggest trying to work out, and it's not easy, and get it on the page quickly so that you have it formulated in your head as the writer. But we'll see that the external conflict is specific. The character is specific. The more specific and unique they are, the better. Quite honestly, make them as unique as possible. But it must be mirrored. It's not really. It must be coupled with the internal conflict, which is universal. So you see, the story works on two levels. The story is about someone who is absolutely unique and as unique as possible. So you really want to work on that.
Okay.
You don't, ideally, you don't want them to be generic. You want, that's
Okay.
the sort of that's the make it new part, right? If Ezra Pound says make it new,
Mm.
that's the new part. They're unique. We have not seen this character before. They're interesting to us, right?
Okay.
And you're getting close to that. You're getting close to that with Deepak in some ways, but he's not really unique enough. He just seems like a person who wants and needs a loan.
Yeah.
But then the internal struggle is the universal element. And so stories are about, really, they're about this sort of two things. They're about absolutely unique experiences that speak to universal experiences. And that is what the reader wants, right? They want to see their universal struggle dealt with, but they want to see it in a way that's completely separate from them, in a sense, so that they're both totally involved, and they can be involved emotionally, but they're also completely safe because it's absolutely not them. Does that make sense? I think it does.
So when you say universal struggle, does it sort of relate to the primal instinct, as some writers say? You know, things like, you know, what we want survival, the fear of death, or relationships, recognition.
Well, so I mean, relationships are motivated out of the fear of death, I think. But yes, I think so. Yes, yeah. I mean, it it can seem unromantic to bring it down to sort of evolutionary drives,
Right. But
right?
it is that, I
It
guess, yeah.
can, but in my in my lifelong investigation of human motivation, I have to admit that I do arrive at that. We might seem like we haven't struggled enough to arrive at it, but yes.
Okay, all right. Well, that makes
And
sense.
but like if you think of like I go back, I like the Bonnie and Clyde story a lot, right? So
Mm.
Bonnie is poor, right? And so she decides that, the external struggle is that she decides that she needs money, and then she goes about robbing banks. So that's the external struggle. But the internal struggle is that she is poor, and she feels that she lives without respect, and she's put down, or what have you. And so on the instinctual level, she's being excluded from the community, which is a survival issue.
Right.
She thinks that getting money is going to mean that she's included, and therefore she increases her survival. If we're looking at it from that level, which I think it is accurate. I think that the survival is, if we put other things aside, we can see that the desire for relationship, the desire for community, the desire for connection, the desire for all of these other things that bind us, what that we might call love in some kind of broader sense or abstract sense, is a desire for survival. And then the external thing is that sort of false, like money, for example, that false way to try and achieve that survival.
Right. That is what it manifests as. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that I think that you've really nailed it in terms of your thinking about this piece.
So I have a question for you. So this is the first chapter of what is going to be a novel. And I think that at least in the later pages, I thought that I have put the internal struggle, but I'll have to read it again with a very critical eye.
Mm-hmm.
The external struggle is probably coming out there, but the internal struggle, why does he want that loan? Why does he want his company to survive? So that I'll have to relook at it if that is correct.
Right. Well, you want to have some indication, even if you've not developed it very much. Everything that you present in the beginning, right, the external struggle and let's say the internal struggle, all you want to do is get them on the page so that we have some sense of them. That's like, he's drumming his fingers on the armrest. He's smoothing his thin hair. He picks up. He has the picture on his, he picks up the picture on his lap, and it's, his child who's attached to a respirator, right?
Right.
And then he puts it back into his pocket, and he says, "Is he ready to see me yet?" Right? So now we understand what he's trying to do a little bit.
Right.
I mean, it may seem mercenary to do that kind of work, as a storyteller, but we have, I don't know, I can't explain us. We have to just do it as well as we possibly can.
Right.
But we do need to do it. We need to know why this matters, on some level.
What you said, this makes sense. I just want to get one sentence in. So when you say that the character has to be unique, I was just reading Save the Cat a couple of days back, and there he says that give your characters a limp and an eye patch. So this sort of like makes sense with that.
Yeah.
That's probably a little extreme and necessary for the screen, but I get that.
Yeah, that's the save the cat thing. Yeah. But yes, try to make them unique. So right now, but understand that that's something. So if we understand that we want our character to be unique, and in fact, we want every character to be unique in our story so they can be differentiated. They should talk differently. They should behave differently. And when we watch the movies, we don't even recognize it, but we see that. So yeah, so understand that you have the problem of Deepak seeming right now to be just a businessman.
Right.
So you can write about anything and anybody because everyone is unique. But you need to understand that you want to do that.
Right.
You need to understand that you want that uniqueness, and you need to understand that you also want that universal quality.
Right.
So, I hope, and like even if I show the card of, the kid on the respirator, I start to make Deepak more unique, but I want to make him more unique even than that. And he'll develop to be a more unique person, but I want to have the sense that he's going to be unique right from the very start. Right.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to that is, I believe that that's like the 1-2 punch that is key for the reader's involvement, because the reader does not want to, the reader actually wants to escape the struggles of their own life.
Yeah.
Right? They don't want to read about a person who's exactly like them, and they don't want to go through reading this and say, "Oh my God, that's my life," and "Oh my God, how terrifying it is." They don't want any of that.
Right.
Right? They want to look at this person and say, "That person is totally not me," but actually their beating heart is just like mine, right?
That's right.
That's the ideal situation of both connection and distance, or we could say distance and connection, however we want to put it, that makes the reading experience really potent. For the reader, the reading this, no matter how difficult the situation is, it's safe.
Right.
But it's also threatening. It's both. And that is the sweet spot. I just want to, while we're on the beginning, this is a much more micro thing, but just so I can get it in. Okay, good. I have that. So I just marked this beginning a little bit. So this is really truly micro. We've talked about the macro, and that was awesome. So Deepak stopped drumming his fingers on the frayed armrest. So like when we want to write detail, I would like everyone to really embrace nouns and verbs, right? And strong verbs, okay? Not empty verbs, not to be verbs, etc. Not helping verbs, not ing verbs, nouns and verbs. And definitely take many looks at your adverbs, because that's a word that's describing an abstract action. So that's already very weak. And then also look at your adjectives, but you'll notice that we can get into patterns. So we have frayed armrest of the stained sofa and smooth his thinning hair, right? That's like
right. 3 adjectives in one sentence.
You're creating right. You're creating this pattern. You're overloading the adjectives with your desire to be descriptive. But actually, Deepak stopped drumming his fingers on the armrest of the sofa and smoothed his hair is actually a better sentence to my ear. I am more there than having to negotiate frayed armrests. I'm getting too much. And then he flicked. This is hugely important. Okay, it's going to seem tiny. It's going to seem tiny. And this is the trust your reader. Trust your reader.
Right.
Advice. He flicked his wrist to see the time. Then you wrote again. Okay. We did not need that because emotionally, so you have to understand when you say again, you mean you're now drawing my attention to something that's happened before this time. So you've actually gone into backstory to tell me that he looked at his wrist again. Instead, you just trust your reader. If you saw it in the movies, you'd see someone like this, right? They go, you get it, right? Yeah. You understand. When he looked at his wrist, you understood.
Yeah. This is an insecure newbie writing.
Yeah. So trust your reader.
Right.
When you put the action, they might not think the words. So this is one of the things, like you come at it, you're like, okay, I want to show that he's impatient. So I'm going to have him look at his wrist, but I really want to make everyone know that he's really impatient, that he's done it multiple times. Forget about the idea of impatience. You're not going to translate the word to the reader. They don't think impatient. What they get is the visual from which they understand things emotionally. They're not engaged in a kind of analysis like you are. You're basically reverse engineering it, right? Yeah, as a writer, right. You reverse engineer it, and you're like, I want to show that he's anxious, so I'm going to have him look at his wrist. Now and now you want the reader to engineer it back up.
Right.
Don't do that.
I have a word for this. I call it news reporting. News sticker.
Okay. Yeah.
So explaining things specifically. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, it's
right.
It's fine.
And I do go to trust your reader. Every single human being, no matter what you think about their intelligence, Ram, every single human being is negotiating all of these experiences from other human beings and the environment all the time, and understanding them and going evolutionarily and surviving. So our capacity for analysis, while not always articulated in our mind, is ongoing. We understand the world that we're in. Every human being does. Right. So trust your reader to be able to do that. We prefer to go to that level of emotive understanding because that's so much more seamless than intellectual understanding, which is distanced. But anyway, it's a very small example, but I would like when we when we write up our Indic Academy style sheet, we want to have this sentence on there to illustrate this idea.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
He flicked his wrist to see the time period again. Period. That's it. Cross out again. All right. Thanks, Ram. This is great work. I'm excited. I want to repeat. You're thinking about writing a novel with this character. So delve into the difficulties of writing about this character and get that work done. But once you start doing it, you'll see this dual line that we run between the unique and the universal is incredibly enriching. I mean, I think this is the first big payoff of writing, actually. It's so great for us as writers to be able to investigate essentially other people, other human beings with this sort of dual run, to start to understand other people in this dual nature. It is truly eye-opening. It is really the great benefit of writing, to understand this dual nature, absolute uniqueness and absolute universality running simultaneously in every human being.
Right. Yeah, that's
unbelievable.
Interesting. Yeah. And when I think of some of the movies that I really liked, I can actually see that happening. So the characters are unique, but the struggle is universal.
I'm going to argue that you always see it happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Glad we had this conversation. Thank you very much, because I'm 20,000 words down. And I'm glad we had this conversation now and not after I had written 50,000.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, it doesn't matter when really doesn't matter. It's just a question of time. Like, these conversations maybe can lead us a little bit, but it's just, I mean, it's so slight. I mean, all we're doing is trying to, we talk. Talk is cheap, Ram. It really is. Even a long time ago, I actually equated the writing process with yoga. It's like, you can talk about yoga as much as you want, but you're not going to get more flexible. So you gotta spend the time on the mat.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ram.
Thank you very much.
Let's see. Oh, Rashma. Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Give me 1 second. Take off my sweatshirt as I'm warming up here.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a short section. Is this going to be a longer play, or is this?
Oh yeah. It's going to be 2 act. I'm hoping 75 to 90 minutes, somewhere there. And I'm not started. This is like I'm on ground zero with this play, and this is my initial process where I'm seeing if these characters want to talk and if it's worth investing time and energy and emotion on these people. But I've felt just compelled to kind of invest in them. So the more I write about them, the more I like them.
Right. That is a great thing to think about. I've definitely heard that said in many workshops. When a play or anything, or a script or a novel, you want to think, do you want to spend a lot of time with these characters? Right. Are these people you want to spend time with? And if you don't, then, recognize that you will have to if you're going to be writing about them. Well, right. That's great. And there's a kind of meta element to this. It seems like that maybe the writer is simultaneously writing them and they're acting. Is that true? Like I was having a little trouble understanding. It seemed like there was a certain point in this where the writer says, "Can you go back?" It's almost as if he's saying, "Can we go back to this section? Sit on the couch again. Here's the shoes," and then they go forward again. It seems like there's a little bit of a meta element in it. Did I misinterpret that?
Yeah, I was just playing it on the stage and seeing, how it would play out, also blocking it in my mind that they're here and then he moves her back up downstage for an intense scene, that kind of thing.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So he's both writing and you're moving around basically he's writing it, and then he's also, and you're reblocking it within the
Right.
play as I'm reading it.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I mean, you might not want to keep that, I guess. Okay. Let's have you read a little bit of it. So maybe you can just set us up a little bit, and maybe just this first page.
All right. At Rice, a sparsely furnished apartment, Van Gogh stars painting replica on LED screen or as a cyclorama. Jai 46 types on his laptop. A mug is on the dining table, which has been converted to a workstation. Jed, the winter of our discontent. Fuck no. Deletes, types. The discontent of our winter. That's better. Types. The discontent of our winter is here, darling. Sound of the key door opens. Anjali 43 enters. Jed does not look up. Anjali, were you thinking of me, darling? Anjali sits on the sofa, takes off her shoes. It was a forget it. Jay goes back to typing, murmuring under his breath. Anjali waits for him to talk. Beat. Anjali, did you call the agent? Jay, Anjali, what do you mean? Jay, it's a forget it. Your coffee's in the microwave. Anjali, when did you make the decoction?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds better. I was a decoction. I was like, decoction? I'm
Coffee.
not really familiar with it. Yeah, I think of concoction, I know. But now when you say it, it sounds better to my ear. Okay. Yeah, so there's a couple things. One thing I was thinking of is like, so they're Indian, I feel.
Yeah.
And we have these sort of markers of like, Europeanisms.
Yeah.
The Van Gogh is there, and the Winter of Our Discontent, obviously from Shakespeare.
Right.
Richard III, I want to think, but I'm not positive.
Yes, Richard III, that's right.
Yeah. So we have these sort of European kind of colonial influences.
Right.
And, I was reminded, do you read Murakami? Have
Yeah.
you read,
Yeah, I love Murakami, yes.
So those short stories are, some of those short stories are just insanely good. I love them. Amazing. But I love the way he depicts this world, right? That it's Japan,
right?
But it's filled with like everyone's eating spaghetti, and our main character's always listening to European classical music, and I'm not positive about whether American movies come in. Maybe that's a little bit too close to home, but like the influence of this sort of monoculture that's spreading all over the world is a part of the story. But it's so much so that it's a pointed part of the story. And I don't know if you're going for that, but I would suggest it if you are, because it can seem reading it, and this character who's in India, but he's basically working off of a kind of colonial dramatic tradition, that it should be pointedly so, in a sense, right? Like that needs to be one of the things that you're actually dealing with into play.
Right. Okay.
It seems to me,
Right. I suppose that is why it's taken him 5 years, and he's still struggling with the novel, because it's seen that people who write in regional language get it out faster, and people like me, and I'm going to kind of not call out others, but just call out myself, that we write in a borrowed language, the colonial hangover that we have, and we talk of symbols which are Western. So we've increased our burden, as it is. Creative writing is hard, but we've kind of,
So that is, I mean, what you're saying there, like, I mean, I think again, it goes to, the Murakami is like, there's this, right, that what he ends up speaking to is this much larger psyche, sort of like psychic phenomenon of like, what is it to live the life as we now have it? And what you just said about like sort of living and thinking in a borrowed language, that is, that starts to lead to some incredible places in terms of discussing really the modern condition, which is what we're really dealing with. I mean, we're dealing with the individual struggle, but speaking of colonialists, Joseph Conrad said that the story is the glow that brings out the haze. And what that means to me is that the struggle of characters basically illumines the situation of modern society, culture, or whatever, or humanity, basically, as it is in the moment, as it's developed. I think Murakami really nails that so well. I mean, just brilliantly. And I think that when you start talking about someone who's writing in a borrowed language, because yes, this is, to me, it strikes me both as cliched, right? Obviously, it's cliched.
That's the idea.
But the cliche is in the borrowing, right?
Right.
And the feeling of the need to borrow and depend on the cliches that have already been provided to you, rather than to going to one's own traditions or what have you. So, I think that that's. I guess I'm just pointing it out to say, if you go into it, but go into it intentionally. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and use that. Yeah.
Then the other thing that I notice is that basically, so Jai here, and I'm going to go into, maybe go off a little bit as I but the character here, he's really being put down. He's being sort of ridiculed by himself, by his actions, so like the winter of our discontent, fuck no, deletes and types, the discontent of our winter. I mean, he's being rendered a kind of fool in terms of interiorly, right? It's not, it's not a misunderstood action. He's not trying to do the right thing and then makes a mistake. He's really being ridiculed in terms of the way he thinks. He's that ridiculous writer stereotype in a way, who's myopic and self-centered and narcissistic, and and I guess this is kind of a big thing when you're thinking about characters that you want to develop. This is like, I see, in a way, he is being ridiculed by you because you're giving him the things to think and say and write.
Right.
We're not getting. We're getting a stereotype. We're not getting the true human being who is struggling. Like, not to be too complex about it, but if he were struggling with his own borrowed language, that is a true struggle and a true human struggle. But right now he feels as if he's just being sort of ridiculed as a like an absurd person who kind of doesn't want to work. And as a writer, I know that it's true that I don't want to work. That's right. It's not that I don't want to work, but I don't want a boss. That's the truth.
I think with us, especially because we were ruled by the British, Shakespeare has been given down to us as God, So that's what I was thinking. But yes, you're right. I mean, if you could be struggling more with grammar rather than, I'm just thinking, it would sound more authentic for an Indian writer struggling with grammar and maybe thinking that there's too many adverbs there or something like that. Yeah.
Or you can make it even more pointed. We can use our characters a little bit. You can say, she walks in and he says, "What do you think of this? Now is the winter. This is the discontent of our winter." And it's like, isn't that just borrowed Shakespeare? Why don't you write in your own language?
Yeah. Okay.
Why don't you speak for yourself instead of speaking for others? What's wrong with you? And also, why don't you get a job? Anyway. So now you're making it, it blow up. Basically, right. and you work towards his interior issue, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to work towards those interior struggles in these external ways, even though they might be misplaced. Anjali is also a bit of a stereotype, here. So she's, I mean, it can be a little bit of a reverse stereotype, but he's the ne'er-do-well, writer who's, living on your couch. You don't want to get those. You let one in, you get you're going to get a bunch. And she's the one who's dutifully working and in a sense has a more narrow sort of psychic, space. And that's a little bit of a stereotype too. So we don't really know what we don't know Jai's in a way, his internal struggle. It doesn't, and unlike, Ram or anyone else who's writing prose, you have to figure out a way to get the internal struggle,
Right.
right, out on the stage, because it has to be articulated basically.
Right.
Whereas we writers who can go into interiority and present interiority,
We don't.
we don't have to do that. We can do it. Um, that's, it sort of like actually goes to save the cat a little bit. You're trying to show that internal kind of caring and connection and stuff. That's what the save the cat ends up doing, is showing that internal struggle. You're trying to be tough on the exterior, but you're actually soft on the interior. You both want to protect yourself, but you also want to reach out to others. That might be a way to think of it. But anyway, you do have the responsibility. You're just basically forced, because you're dealing with drama, to get that internal struggle to the outside, and you basically have to do it with both characters.
Right.
So,
Right.
and
Okay.
which then makes them much more human.
Right.
You have to, so you actually have, just as we were talking about in Ram's piece, you have to develop the uniqueness. So Jai, for example, the uniqueness of his being a writer like Ram's businessman, that's generic. But being a writer who's struggling to write in a borrowed language, that's unique, much
Right.
better. That elevates the character. Anjali right now is, just, a woman who's working and supporting a, shiftless man. I mean, who
Right.
doesn't, but we need to work on making her unique too.
Right.
And we need to develop the universal struggle in both those characters.
Right.
But, you write, as you know, and as, it leads you write, this great dialogue, and it's
Right.
intense, but it's just a banter,
Right.
and many people do engage in this kind of banter, of course, and most people do, maybe, and it's a way to develop relationships, but it's, in its sense, it's superficial. That's all okay, but for the reader or the audience witnessing that, all they're doing is witnessing something superficial, and what you want them to do is witness both the thing that's happening, but also the depth
Underneath.
behind it,
Yeah.
right? The true human depth behind it. And that's what we're not getting so far here, in this manifestation. But I think that this is
Exposition, and also this is just early finding the characters and also the voices. Yeah.
what and maybe I can ask too, I mean, obviously you're a writer.
Right.
Why do you cast Jai the writer as a man? I'm just asking.
Because it's very easy, convenient to have a woman working at home, and kind of pardon is forgiven easily by the society because she's not expected to earn. And if she was kind of managing, she would still be able to sneak out 2 to 3 hours to write for herself. But for a man to give up job only to write or to do something is kind of not looked at upon. What do I say?
No,
People really don't.
Culturally, he's taking a larger step to do
Yes.
something like that. He's taking
Yeah.
a larger risk
Yes,
in
yes.
regard to the culture at large.
Right. That's the thing. For instance, I know this guy who just, and that's the question I'm asking: that why do people give up? They give up their corporate jobs, and then they say we want to do something else. And in Jay's case, he's writing. In another person's case, he just said he wanted to travel. And then they just kind of his marriage. He's just signed his divorce papers yesterday, and so it ends up everything. That one thing that you want to do kind of has burns everything else around you, but you still can't let it go. That's what I will be kind of creating as a journey.
Well, let me throw this out. Like, I would think that Jai is maybe a central character and also one that you basically identify with more.
Right.
So, there is the writing maxim is write what you know. So I actually don't ascribe to that. but I do ascribe to the maxim, you must know what you write about. So, you have to just figure out a way. I don't think we should be restricted. I mean, God forbid that I should have to write about characters that are just like me all the time. Like that, I mean, that's like being John Malkovich, right?
Right.
That infinite, reciprocal narcissism. I will throw it out to you that since the objective is to get as deeply into character as possible, and if Jai is your central character, you might want to cast Jai as a character a little bit more like yourself so that you can probe more deeply the issues that are more significant to me than, in a way, the gender divide. The gender divide, yes, that's a classic, sort of the sexual politics, gender politics, obviously a classic. And I don't want to say it's superficial. Obviously, it's massively important. But I think that this issue of borrowed language is actually a bigger, more universal issue that you could probably explore with more accuracy and insight in yourself, and then reflect it on the page, then through this male character who there are a number of things that you might not understand about, or be able to access as easily about the male psyche. You basically give yourself two really hard jobs. One, to understand the male psyche and the interiority of the male psyche, and to deal with this issue of borrowed language. The issue of borrowed language, I really think, is more interesting because our language is how we understand ourselves, right? In a way.
Right.
And also in a way not, because there is that sort of emotional, and there's a cultural inclusion that is not language based, but the way we think is language based.
Right.
And the way we think, and I'm sort of involving myself in this a little bit too. Obviously, we know that our language has structures that create different kinds of consciousnesses. So that's, I think that's a very fascinating avenue. And I'm just sort of suggesting that you might be able to access that, by casting a character that's more like yourself, because you know those struggles so well, but they're not struggles that any of us really try to probe. But now you're using this format to probe that interior self. And frankly, that's what I do with my work too. I'm using characters in a way to probe my own psyche and my own understanding of,
Right. It's just that with changing his gender, I raised the stakes, and I was doing it more for dramatic stakes because, the expectation of earning, which he's going against, and therefore Anjali has a lot more of ammunition to fire at him.
Right. Well, so we'll probably have to move on in a second, but if we talk about that unique thing and then the universal thing. So actually right now, in some ways, though you've reversed their genders, I'm suggesting that they do actually fulfill kind of stereotypes too. So we're talking about that issue of uniqueness.
Right.
Let's, just keep it in that ballpark. What makes your character unique? That's what we're talking about. Is it whether they're male or female? Is that the unique aspect of character? Is it that, what is it finally? Because it's bringing out the uniqueness that matters, not. Yes, you're right in that you have the gender divide, and you have the perceptions about gender in the culture, generally, that you can use to dramatic effect. And obviously, we as dramatists use those things for dramatic effect because we want to use all the tools at our disposal all the time. But I guess I'm a little bit saying, let's keep thinking about it and don't use some tools and then neglect maybe the more important tools. But we'll just keep that sort of like, how do we make these characters unique? Make sure that we develop that uniqueness, and then also make sure that we're working on the issues of universal struggle that our reader will connect with as their own, while they get to safely watch people who are completely not like them.
Right. Okay. But what would be the universal struggle here? Would it be that somebody wanting to follow a need, a calling so desperately that is willing to burn down other things or, neglect other aspects of life? Is that the universe? We all have that one thing that we want to do. I'm not.
Well, yes. I mean, that's the thing with the writer. So right now, the writer is sort of this ne'er do well writer who seems like he doesn't want to work. He wants to just hang out at home.
Right.
But yes, it's very to find the driving force of the writer. That takes some effort, and to writers and artists and so many people are really maligned.
Yeah.
So you'll have to search for that, and you probably have to search for that in yourself. The other thing that could be, if you wanted to up the stakes, really quickly, you could have Jai writing in English, and you could have Anjali speaking in Hindi.
Right. Okay.
So it's like, and he's like, how do you like that? And she says, why don't you write in your own language? Now we've really, wow, we just brought that, collision,
Right.
And that, I mean, she's like, it's not only that you write in it, you think in it,
Right.
Ooh.
And maybe Anjali is the one who knows the language better than Jay, and that would just give her instant, that this is where you're wrong. I don't know. And make her smarter. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, we better move on. I think it's a very, very interesting start. Really fascinating.
Thank you.
Let's see. Did that. Sorry, I have to just check this. What is this? Is Nivedita here? If I'm saying that right?
Yes, I am.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. I'm fine. I just have a bad throat, so please excuse some coughing in between.
Yeah, I think everyone here on the West Coast of the U.S. has a bad throat too, because we've been inhaling smoke for like 2 months. So I feel sympathetic. Okay, let's see. Let me remind myself. Okay, maybe you could tell us. Let's see. Do I have this on here? Oh, I do. Okay. Well, maybe I'll just have you start. You haven't submitted anything for this writing workshop before.
No, I heard about it from Ram only last week, so thanks to him.
Great. Well,
thanks to you.
Yeah, great to see your work. Thanks for submitting something. Maybe you can read this first. Maybe you can read this first part.
Yeah, sure. As dusk cloaks the sky and the sun sighs into the horizon, a 5-year-old girl is sitting cross-legged on the floor of a room dominated by a giant arrangement of figurines. Meticulously arranged in 7 steps as wide as the wall of the room itself, the dolls range from her favorite bullock cart at the bottommost step to the mighty but intimidating Balaji at the top. She lisps and trips over the words of the Sanskrit verse, invoking my presence, and I smile, but mostly in sadness, because it is not fervor, not hope, and not happiness that appeals to my heart, and therefore paves a path to my blessing, but disappointment and despair. No one knows this. The other thing no one knows, being forever is overrated. I whisper in that little girl's ears, go play, and she jumps off to do just that. Children are life in its purest form, but as they grow, worldly layers wrap and smother this amrit, the nectar of creation. An adult may live her entire short life without even knowing about this energy at her core, but a child's inner voice is as natural to her as a mother's constant badgering about something or the other.
Okay, thank you. I really like this next paragraph too. Like, I think that you really it's so nice, the opening of this, the way you basically center in on this girl, and I think you really capture her experience so nicely. And I see it from this other point of view that ends up being a god. I don't know what god, but anyway, I see that it's this divinity that's watching her, you know, doing this. And the divinity is so wonderfully benevolent towards her
Yeah.
in a way that we'll see in the next paragraph, the mom kind of isn't, you know, it's like, it's just like, it's a nice little mix of what's going on there. And I really feel those perspectives. I really enjoyed that. So, and appreciated the details here and driving into that point of view.
Right.
I will always have the sort of like, you know, like my Spider-Man tingly senses go off when we adopt points of view of gods, because I'm like, that gives us a kind of authority in our work that is obviously rather profound, right? So I'm sort of like, what are we going to do with this point of view, you know, when we have the point of view of the God? So I do sort of take a note of that. I think the issue is that the God has a kind of cultural weight to it, right? And I think we can often do, if we want to center in on this girl and her devotions and her life, or her relationship with her mom, with that as a part of it, what I would suggest is actually having a narrator who does not, and this is where I would tend to lean, have a narrator without personality, because the God does have a personality. Like, try to have a narrator without personality, and also a narrator, and this is, everyone knows that I suggest this, a narrator without bias, right? Because when we have personality and bias, then we're also getting a subjective world, right? And so, like, when I get, let's see, where's, you know, like when I get a line like this, children are life in its purest form, I'm like, that's a point of view, right? That's a you know, that's a subjective statement. When it's, I'm wondering where it's coming from. Does that make sense? Am I?
Yeah, it does. No, Papa, I'm talking. See, this is the girl I wrote about. She's making her
Great.
appearance. Oh yeah.
You capture her so well on the page.
She's fierce. Yeah, sorry. So I was asking about that, Papa. Arun, na patient irke. Oh, sorry. So I was asking about the subjective view, right? Why is that? I mean, for lack of a better word, bad, or why should you? Because does it interfere too much?
The subjective narrator. The subjective narrator. Yeah. Well, because the reader doesn't have an objective base from which to operate and understand the world for themselves, I think is basically I mean, that's a kind of a complicated way to say it, but I think that what the reader wants is they want to understand the world for themselves. The narrator and the writer have so much power over the reader's perceptions already based on what they present in the story. I present this scene. I don't present this one. I present this one. We have a lot of power as a writer to create the reader's perceptions, but the reader wants to feel like they have some base, I feel, in some kind of objective reality. What happens is if you have a subjective narrator who tells me things that are true, basically I have I mean, maybe I'm particularly sensitive to, this kind of authoritarian structure, but when I have an authority tell me this is true, I go, is it? It basically throws me out of the work, because now I'm grappling whether I believe it, either I believe it seamlessly or I basically am thrown out of the work. I mean, children are life in its purest forms. I mean, I don't have any reason to really argue with that, but do I really think that? And, I haven't thought that before, and I don't even know clearly what that means. So now I'm grappling with this idea. Where is it coming from? Whereas when I was just watching the girl, you know, and she's repeating, I mean, the great thing that you have actually in this opening scene is that she's, you know, basically doing a kind of a terrible job with her verses in Sanskrit right at first when she's on her own, but then when the mother comes in, she does it perfectly, right? That being able to see those two things with just pure objectivity, I take a lot away myself. And what happens is when I take something away myself and I say, oh, look, I watched it. Basically, this goes back to the idea of show, don't tell. When you just show me things and I think things, I don't question them at all, right? Because I don't question the things that I think. That's the funny thing about us human beings. We always think that what we think is correct. When, you know, with Ram's, you know, looking at the watch, I'm like, he's impatient. I don't question whether he's impatient or not. I've witnessed that he is impatient. And so allowing the reader to witness and discern for themselves is a very, very powerful tool to let's put it this way. That is a tool that we as writers are actually using. Does that make sense? Like,
yes, it does.
We present the stuff and they think and they feel and they do not question what they think and they feel. They're like, I'm thinking and feeling it. It's just as if I'm witnessing life. But we're controlling what they witness. Very, very powerful. I personally would not give up that power with the far lesser power of providing subjective interpretations of what's going on in life that the reader might question. That's like intensely, it sounds intensely philosophical, but it's really just emotional. You know, it is the difference. It's the difference between telling and showing. And and for whatever reason, I have a tremendous sensitivity to being told anything. And as soon as someone tells me something, I question it.
Right.
And so interestingly, when I question it, I also appear. Does that make sense? Like I become manifest. When I read a story, when I'm reading this story about the girl, I'm gone. I disappear. I'm reading about her. She's saying her Sanskrit, you know, verses. She has the dolls around her. I'm completely immersed in the situation. I have done exactly what I want to do, which is abandon my own life, my own ego, my own struggles, and I've gone into this other world to be able to witness it and even participate in it from a safe distance. I love that. That's exactly what I want to do. But when I'm told something, I suddenly appear myself and I go, do I agree with that? And that is not what I want to do, frankly. That defeats the very purpose that I've gone into the story for. I've gone into the story in order to disappear. And now suddenly I've appeared because I'm grappling with whether things are true or not. I don't give my reader that chance if I can help it.
Yes. I understand now. Thank you for.
I think it's tremendously interesting to think about these sort of, because we're finally dealing with psychology of various ways and the way words are used. The words are a bridge. We ideally want that bridge to be going where we meet in the middle, right? The words are a bridge between the author and the reader, and we both come and we meet in the middle. And then the reader takes away this, you know, and the writer gets this satisfaction from being able to meet the reader in the middle. But if the writer comes all the way over the bridge, then the reader doesn't get on the bridge. Huh. I don't know if that works or not. We'll keep that in the workshop. But anyway, so anyway, my little tingling senses go off like, I'm having a God telling me what's true or not, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. But I really do love the attention that you pay to this girl. I love the, you know, tripping over the words of the Sanskrit verse. I would love to even hear some of that. I would love to hear the prayer being done properly. So going back to our theme of the day, the unique and the universal. So the girl with this room and the dolls and the and the tears and saying her Sanskrit and a mom who comes in and then her saying it perfectly. All of that is so unique. I'm absolutely involved. What I don't know is I don't know what the story is about. I don't know what the struggle is yet. I don't know what the universal aspect is that I'm going to connect with, but I definitely get the unique experience. And I'm going to say, for anyone who's wondering, I love that. Okay. Because that is exactly, so, the part of me that wants to leave my world behind, I want to go to a unique world. I want to go and see and experience things that I've never experienced before. But I also want them to resonate with me. So that's the universal aspect. I want them to be completely unlike me so that I'm safe and I'm reading and having a new experience that I've never had before, but I want it to resonate with me. And that's the universal aspect.
Right. Yeah. Oh.
But I think it's a tremendous, I think it's a tremendous start, and I really like this, and I love some of this language here. The mother sees her inert form and is satisfied, but I, her divine mother, can see past the fury in her eyes into the passionate yearning cries of her soul. So, I'm being told that who we want to have see that? The reader. Make it so I can see that. The passionate, like you just said, you just described your own daughter as fierce, I think.
Yeah.
I love that. So show us something so I think she's fierce. So I see that. I what a great, strong character. And then I don't know how you'll do it, but yes, some of your language when you go into, the divine mother, that God and goddess point of view is so great. So you just have to figure out, you will not lose your gifts of language by using other means. Maybe I'll convince you, or find some other way, or like have your God be more objective rather than subjective. But I actually don't doubt this at all when she's talking about the girl cries of her soul in that singular moment when her indomitable will combines with fiery energy. Her spirit is a magnificent mountain. My God, what a great sentence. She is I can't say, Silaputri, the daughter of the mountain of mountains, the Himalayas. Oh my goodness, the daughter of the mountain of mountains. There's your title. Wow, what a title. The daughter of the mountain of mountains.
I'm very bad at titles. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I love the beginning. I did mark that this piece maybe I used the word screed. I had to look it up, but it seems like there's something going on with like politics maybe and other things, and I don't know about, it starts to seem, I don't know if it's talking about news of the day, but I like the center.
Sorry, you were saying I like the center?
Oh, I liked it. I liked the centrality of dealing with the girl. And once I abandon her, then I feel like I'm just in the voice of the God. And I'm actually not interested in the voice of the God, unfortunately. As difficult as that might be, I'm not as interested in the voices of gods. I'm interested in characters that I can connect with, like this girl and her struggle. So like I can connect with her safely because she's unique, but also she has, the heart of every human being striving, in this life. And I can resonate with that. So I like to focus on her. When it goes into voice, I said this to, I think, Ram a long time ago. There's an intoxication with voice, and I've had it. I've had it for sure, where we get a voice in our head and we're like, oh, I love this voice. And now I can do anything. I have done it many times. And it took a long time for me to recognize that voice, particularly in voice, voices are great when we bring them down to the concrete characters, and we want all of our characters to have unique voices. Voice in the narrative, we want to be careful of, particularly if we make it a subjective voice. It can feel very freeing for us to suddenly have a voice in which we can say whatever we want to say and all the things we've never been able to say, because we get to sort of transfer it into this other place. But it ends up being, it has a weakness because it's not concrete. It's not finally concrete. The reader is not identifying with a concrete person, with something that's physical, and with a physical world. They're just in, the music of the voice. You employ it, but on the positive side, you also, when we have that freeing aspect of voice, you employ it very well. I mean, so it's not bad. I mean, not bad.
So
I mean, we just have to find a balance of it.
so that was my doubt, right? So that is, I think, a balance that I need to figure out. Because this, what the voice thinks of the little girl being passionate is subjective, isn't it? So,
yeah. So and then the voice sort of takes over and starts speaking about other things that seem to be not material. I mean, to me, to the story that you've involved me with in the beginning. So yeah, just the reader, they want to connect with a physical reality that is not like their physical reality, but they want to have an emotional resonance with what's happening, the universal struggle in that reality. In terms of this piece, the small thing is like, whatever you begin with, you don't want to do what's called bait and switch, right? The beginning opens up with this girl speaking Sanskrit, and I'm like, I'm in. You got me. I'm ready. I'm ready to read it. And then what it turns into is a voice of a God speaking about the world. And I'm not in for that. If that had been up in the beginning, I wouldn't have continued. Because I can't identify with a God. The immortality of the gods is something that I definitely don't know. To go back to Ram's thing, the essential thing is that universal struggle of survival, that evolutionary need to survive. The God doesn't have that. So how can I possibly understand what that's like? Since everything in my life is driven by my desire to survive.
Right.
Some fantastic language. I hope that you will write a story called The Daughter of the Mountain of Mountains. That is such an unbelievably good title.
Sure. So I just have a couple of questions about something like this, which is very culturally specific, right? With certain names and a culture and, ways of living, and about using Sanskrit words. So my first question is about that, right? I'm going to answer my own question right now and say that you talked about the unique and the universal, and so that's the answer there. Okay.
Well,
so
yes.
But
let me underscore it too. You're right. You're going very fast, obviously. So the unique, the Sanskrit and those Sanskrit words. I personally love foreign language in writing because I want to become acquainted with that unique aspect, and the unique cultural aspects I think are really tremendously important, and you should really lean on them. If you want an audience that is not going to understand those cultural contexts, then you also need to figure out a way to embed within the language the explanation of the language. I have found, this is, the human animal, we're kind of known. So, I love the experience of when I'm reading something and there's foreign language in it, but I'm like, wait a second, I understand Spanish? I'm reading along, I'm like, da 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 da. But they use the language within a context, right? That I feel as if I know it. And then I'm like, I must be a genius. I love the feeling of feeling like I'm a genius. But of course, it's the writer who's allowed me to feel that way by providing all the information I need to understand things. you don't want to create a situation in which the reader looks at things and doesn't understand. One of the things that I've noticed in a Sanskrit, for me reading it, like I have enough familiarity with French and, lived there for a little bit, and Spanish. So when I look at the words, I actually can hear something in my head. The Sanskrit, because of the number of syllables that's often involved, I actually have much more trouble hearing it. And I think that there's a benefit to not only defining words that let's say only an English speaker would, defining words that an English speaker would not understand, but also providing some kind of substance to those words, like the sounds, so that I'm not just looking at a group of syllables. I am really this punctilious, I'm telling you. Like, the reader is looking at this word with like 3 or 4 syllables and nothing is happening in here. That's not a good thing. So there might be a little bit of an aspect of wanting to teach, and I think that this is really true of Hindi. The language is so beautiful, but the inflections are much different than English. The accents are much different than English. So maybe there's a little bit of teaching that needs to be involved too, to help the reader understand how the words actually sound, so something can go on in their head when they look at the symbols on the page. But that's an advanced thing that I just, maybe you and other writers will think about and work on, if you want to reach, really effectively reach an audience so that they remain engaged, through every single word on the page, which I really truly believe in. I don't believe we should have any words on the page that do not engage the reader. So, but anyway,
sure,
sorry, I went off on that, but I want to reiterate that I really, really like the unique aspects of having the culture and the language involved in the text. Absolutely.
Right.
And you had another question?
This is what I wanted to. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this work. It really is a really wonderful language here. And also what I like too, a really sensitive view of this daughter that's so humanizing. That's the thing that really, rings in this piece for me.
Okay, that's wonderful. There's so much that you've gotten from it. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for submitting it. Let's see. What's Ashvani?
I'm here.
Yes, okay. Well, you have your piece. Are you? Hi, nice to see you. Ashvani, I got to tell you, when you start a piece with a character, sitting back, having a whiskey, it makes me feel like I look forward to the day that we're going to sit on some porch somewhere and have a whiskey together. I have to admit.
Same here. Same here.
That is going to be a wonderful day. And we'll just swap stories, and everyone else will come too, and we'll just tell stories all night long. I really look forward to that.
Yes, and some Tennessee whiskey.
Well, I lean a little bit towards the Kentucky bourbon, so
okay,
just a little bit. But I'm happy no matter what. Even if we just tell stories, I'll be happy. So let's see. Let's start with maybe just read a short section of this. And I'm going to cut that one to there. Okay, could you read that short section?
Vijay had been madly in love with the Riya he had courted and married. But as they changed gears from honeymoon to humdrum marital life, he was in for a numbing shock. The first tremor came in the early days when, realizing one day that he had forgotten his towel outside the toilet, he called out to her. She answered him from the kitchen with a grunt, but did not show her face as he expected she would. Finally, after 2 more shouts, she did turn up, but when he asked her to fetch him his towel, she replied, "I am not your servant," and disappeared again, leaving him to his own devices. And with an almost physical agony that drove him into a day of petulant sulk that Ria did nothing to assuage. This behavior gradually became the rule rather than the exception, and he found it increasingly hard to accept her disregard for his sensitivities, often wondering how he had not noticed these traits during their 8 weeks of courtship. The biggest problem was the way she spoke to him. He found the tone insulting and overbearing. In the initial days, he responded to Ria's venomous style of talking with a silence that he hoped would convey his displeasure adequately.
Okay, great. I really like that sentence. He responded, right? He responded to Ria's venomous style of talking with a silence that he hoped would convey his displeasure adequately. It's like the answer is in the question, right? It's like clearly it's not going to. Okay, so in this story we have Vijay, who basically, he becomes involved in a relationship and it doesn't sort of pan out the way he expects. And probably this is fairly universal because we have an idea of an idealized relationship, and then we actually have human beings in a relationship, which are somewhat different than what we think and what we've been taught it should be. And out of this, he begins to. This was sort of fascinating to me. He begins to think of this sort of idealized. You have a very nice description of the woman's laughter, and he basically begins to build upon that to create a sort of alternate personality, a sort of fantasy person, and develops a fantasy relationship with that person. In terms of the basic structures of story, like obviously, Ashvani, we've talked so much about stories that I know you you understand this stuff fairly well. In the basic construction, though, what we're presented with, we get presented with a problem of character that they try to solve, in a sense. They are not able to finally solve that problem, and they must come to another place of change, basically. But what happens in this story, and we talked about this in a different workshop, but we have a kind of what we call a deus ex machina. And a deus ex machina means God in the machine. And it's a wonderful, wonderful visual that comes from Italian drama, in which the action would take place on the stage, and then dropping from the eaves would be like a rope with a moon on it, and there would be a god sitting on there, and they would explain what happened, right? What Deus Ex Machina has come to mean is anytime we basically have the gods, which is really the narrator, take care of the problems for us, explain them away, deal with them, rather than leaving the issue with the character themselves to work out in a way that drives them to basically a change. Does that make sense?
Yes. Definitely.
All that said, the Deus Ex Machina comes in here and basically kills the wife. The gods create this accident that take place off stage, right? It's not the responsibility of any of the characters, and basically she's taken out of the picture, which leaves our main character essentially, as you've written it now, alone with his relationship with this other sort of fantasy, right? That he can enjoy while he drinks his whiskey. So I'm going to say that basically doesn't work because it doesn't provide the situation of story. The situation of story is that it's about a character journey. The gods are not there to take care of their problems. Oh, you're in a relationship that you don't like. Let me go ahead and take her out of the picture, and now you're going to be fine. That's not really how stories tend to work. It's about a character journey in which they're forced to some kind of reconciliation about something. Whatever problem we have basically gets resolved in some way. It's not a question of winning or losing, right? It's a question of sort of changing one's perspective, basically changing one's character. Does that make a little sense? Right now, basically, your main character, Vijay, he wins. I mean, and I've said this before in other places, like in the conflict between protagonist and antagonist forms, it doesn't end with one of them winning over the other. It's not about winning, because if one wins over the other, that means that would have always happened. In this case, what happens is they have this battle, the husband and wife have this battle about their humanity, their respective humanities, right? And what happens is the gods come in and make him win. And basically, Ashwani, we don't really do that.
Would it help if he murdered his wife?
Oh my God, no, I don't think so. How does that make him change? How does that make him change? But you know what as you develop this story though, what I thought was actually kind of interesting, and where I mean, you didn't quite do this in the story, but I thought it would be very interesting that if she died, I was like, there was sort of, I was anticipating a little bit, and you didn't go in this direction, but I was like, if the wife died, I had thought that this other sort of fantasy person would also die, right? And that made me kind of interested in his mourning, right? In his mourning for his loss. And maybe, like, I thought there was an interesting psychological territory you could go into, but you sidestepped that with, basically his newfound happiness as provided by the destiny.
Happy ending.
Yes, right. It's a happy ending for him, right? And that's also why you can't have a murder either, because that's also, he just simply succeeds, in his wishes. And that's not actually what it's about. You know what story you might be interested in reading? That you should read this whole. Oh, I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, did I already suggest that you read Raymond Carver, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love?
Yes.
And you read it, and you did
I haven't
not
read
like
it, but yes, you told me to read it.
Oh, I have told you to read it.
Yes.
Okay. Read the story, Too Much Water So Close to Home. There's a relationship story about a very uncomfortable merger of, souls at the end. But the other thing in this story too, something to develop, is I think that it's always great to just dive into realism, so I liked, you don't have much in regard to the way these two characters are interacting with each other. We actually only get one side of the story, which is his. There is not ever in any life only one side of the story. When we write a story, we do want to develop it from a single perspective. That if the narrator comes in, I think the narrator should be objective, so they give us objective information, essentially. The character will give us subjective information and also perceive objective information. But we should also be able to understand, even though we're in the lens of a subjective lens, we should be given enough information so that we can understand the objectivity too. He might think that she's cruel, but we should see something in contrast to that. I've told this story many times. I taught a graduate workshop to this group, and what we want to have in stories is not for characters to confirm the point of view of our protagonist, but to contradict them. And my illustrative example is I had a guy who basically a misanthrope. He seemed to hate all people, right? And he'd been in production in the movies, and he seemed very unhappy. And he wrote a story in this graduate workshop about a guy on his own that worked in a liquor store. And we're in the liquor store, and he's just like, people are so stupid and dumb and banal and worthless and awful and da da da. We get a nice little section of that, and then in walks two people, and guess how they behave? They're stupid, banal, da 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 da. Right? That is not what we do. The narrator up here is designing a conflict. What we need to see is this character can feel whatever he feels, but the characters who walk in, we have to be able to understand that they're great. They don't fit into his narrative, right? They're not. They arrive to confront his narrative. And anyway, that's my illustrative example. That is what the narrator does. And there's a term for it, actually. We call it imitative fallacy, right? Imitative fallacy is when we produce a work of art that is like life, okay? We should not do that. We're not trying to reproduce life. We're trying to write a story. The difference between life is, okay, a character entering a story does not want to confront themselves. That is I think, a truth of every single person on earth, basically. We basically decide who we are, and we don't want anyone to mess with it, right? They don't want to confront themselves, and then the story goes on, and they don't have to. That's an imitative fallacy. Our job is to write a story in which a character does not want to change, and we confront them with circumstances that force them to change and understand themselves in a deeper and more profound way. That is our objective. So, in a sense, what happens here, and you have the Deus Ex Machina that makes it happen, but what happens here is we have a character who is not forced to confront themselves. Instead, they get to do what we do in life so often, which is not avoid confronting ourselves. So that's a deeper consideration, but I think a really important one, and I think a really profound reason why we as writers should be engaged in storytelling. I mean, once we understand that this is our objective, that we actually have the objective to confront the self, to whether we're inventing them completely or whether they're based on some version of us, there's always going to be some combination of that. But we're basically constructing a character who is becoming confronted by life and discovering something about life that changes and transforms them. That was a lot, Ashwani. you look like I've bludgeoned you with a mallet at this point.
No, I was expecting that, but my very poor defense is that after reading this and editing it a couple of times, it read very nice to me. So I thought I'll still push it to you.
I know, because Ashwani, you have such a wonderful way with language. That's again, that voice. I mean, you have really such a wonderful narrative language. That's great. You're not ever going to lose that. You're always going to have that facility with language. The other thing is, there's this moment where he's lost a towel. I would just like to say, keep going with that. If he doesn't have a towel, she says, I'm not his servant. I want to see him out in the hallway, naked and wet, going and picking up. I want to see him really, I want to see the image of him and how humiliated he feels by this, right? I want that to really be witnessed. And I want more of things like that. It's only his perception. I mean, he's not really humiliated. All he's done is walked out into the hallway wet and picked up a towel. That's not a big deal. And, in the world, it's not life-threatening. But it's obviously humiliating to him. And we should really feel that and participate in that so that we can go down basically his pattern of thinking. But as always, you're delving into the psychology of characters is always fascinating. So,
Otis,
yeah.
I think you have, of the 6 pieces, you've gone through 4. There are 2 remaining now. Question is, do you want to take them up next week, or do you want to take one up today and the final one next week? Because there is one by, I think, a gentleman named Sunil Srinivasan that is pending. If you can take that, or I'll leave that to you.
Right, and I think I have a piece by Jay. So Jay, Jay, sorry, you're a regular, so we'll push you to next week.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, thanks, Jay. I had a feeling it would be okay. Yes, let me find that other piece. Not there, not there, not there. Oh, maybe we have even two other pieces. We have Jay and I think Aditi. So
sample writing for Otis. Yeah, that's my piece.
I'm fine waiting for next time.
Nick, I'm really sorry to hurry.
Yes.
Yeah. I got to drop my daughter in the railway station, so my apologies. Yeah.
Oh no! I really want to get to your work because I definitely appreciate seeing some new work. So I just don't have organization. It's not my thing, I guess. Okay, let's talk about this piece a little bit. We basically have two. I see that you're going to have a connection with the wormhole, yes, right, between these two points in time. One is, I guess you're giving me here the longitude and latitude, yes, in the year 747 AUC. What is AUC?
AUC means this is before Christian era. It's a kind of Roman calendar before Christ.
Right, before that calendar, right? Okay, so we have that period, and we have this character out there, and then we have. I'm going to actually draw you to, and then we also have a simultaneous, and I imagine the two will go back and forth.
Yeah,
that takes place in at Stanford. Wait, let me, sorry, I'm going to go just up here if you can see that. Well, let's just say, let's go to here. Maybe you could read these, this little section in here. It would be great. Thank you.
If your idea of a wormhole is this, you're in the wrong hall, he remarked, triggering a general wave of laughter. The wormhole of physics is neither a hole nor a worm. It's a name given to one of the most exciting and complex discoveries in quantum physics. A wormhole should look more like a web or string, but difficult to visualize that in our brain used to 3D images. Professor Farnell's work comprised expanding the string theory to combine Newtonian and quantum physics. For his pioneering work on the spiderweb model of string theory, he was awarded the Nobel Prize. It was not a concept easily understood, but the professor tried to simplify his theories for everyone in the audience. He took a white paper and placed 2 dots on the paper and asked the audience, I have made 2 dots on this paper, A and B. How do you make anything move from dot A to dot B instantly? There was a silence before a pretty Indian girl answered, Sir, if you fold the paper so that dot A overlies dot B, any event happening on dot A also happens on dot B. Excellent. Your name, madam? Anisha. From India? Yes, sir. And you are a biologist. From Stanford? Yes, sir. May I presume you're a student of Professor Mary? Yes, sir.
Yeah,
thank you.
Great. Yeah, so this is the Stanford area. It did strike, it struck me that I don't think they would have such a personal conversation. Not in the Stanford of today, maybe some yesteryear. This is, I think I noted that there would be a sexual harassment lawsuit should that conversation take place at Stanford today.
Okay, so yeah.
But,
I mean, aren't Nobel laureates given any leeway in hand? I mean, he's a Nobel laureate, and I'm just wondering, yeah.
Probably not.
Okay,
I don't
okay.
know. I don't think so.
Okay.
But it's I mean, it also, yeah. I mean, who knows, you know? But it's not a problem that's hard to solve, you know, at all. And then we have this other character here who's in the mountains with their camel, and perhaps destined destined to die. And you have some more chapter there. I mean, I think that this is developing in a very interesting way.
Yes.
I appreciate how deeply. Jay, we gotta cut your mic. Oh, thank you, Jay. I really like how detailed you're being about this area. I can still, you know, quite honestly, you're being so detailed, and it's very hard to write about these desert environments, as I actually know, because I do write about desert environments. I can feel that it's maybe not as specific even as I might like it. I might like it even more specified, but I think that you're doing a lot of work to really put me into that situation. And aside from some of the feeling of unreality about the Stanford, you know, classroom, I think that that's quite good too in terms of the interaction and the development of this idea of the wormhole. So I don't know how it's going to pan out, but I think this is one of like the major things in storytelling that we're really after. So I will often say the reader is not reading to understand what is happening. They're reading to find out what's going to happen next, right? And so when I read this section of the guy on the camel, I absolutely know what is happening. When I read this section in Stanford, I absolutely know what is happening. And my question is, what is going to happen next, right? I mean, that's it. That's the thing that we're really after as writers. And you clearly understand, you're putting things on the page. I have no idea how they're going to connect. That's exactly what you want from me. I feel that you know what you're going to do, right? I'm not questioning. I don't think you've made some mistake, right? I don't think you've made a mistake. I think you know what you're doing, but I don't know what it is. So I cannot wait for it to unfold.
Yes.
And for me to find out.
Okay.
Any issues in these two sections? I think you've done. We started with Ram, and we see, like, you know, he makes a real commitment to get us into that scene with the business person and the bank. And obviously Rashma does that too, because she's dealing in drama. So she's really getting us into the scene with the writer and the girlfriend or wife who comes back. So all of those things are really driving into scene. You do that too, right? You put us right into the action. You're not dealing with things that are not happening. You're dealing with things that are happening.
Okay.
Both in the desert, right? In the 700 AUC and in the Stanford campus. So you're putting us in that situation. You're obviously paralleling them, and you're bringing up the wormhole. And I'm like, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Keep writing.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's great. Like I say, any issues, you know, they're little micro issues. I would try and convince you not to lean on adverbs, you know, as I, you know, was busting on Ram, you know, beware of the overuse of adjectives, concrete nouns, particularly when you deal with the environment of the desert. But even when you're dealing with Stanford, it's sort of generic. We want to be able to have things in there that make them seem unique and true.
Okay.
So don't be afraid of like doing some research to provide those nouns. It can be very difficult to write about these sort of generic environments like a lecture hall at Stanford, because again, going back to this idea, we need to make everything that we're writing unique.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So what takes place in it is universal, but we need to make it unique. So you need those words that make the desert unique, and you need those words maybe unfortunate words, you know, that we might not like that much, that make the Stanford lecture hall unique too. I mean, if it were me, this is the kind of thing I do. I mean, I would go to a Stanford lecture hall. I would pick which lecture hall it was, and I would go in there and I would write down details of the place.
Okay.
You know, and I would, you know, I would want to know what that lectern looked like. I would want to know these various things, because we don't actually need that many of them. But when we use details that are absolutely accurate and unique to a space, we drive the reader into, you know, we rivet them into the space. But those are small issues in comparison to plotting, really. And because I'm driven by the plot, I'm not at this point so worried. I'm really driven by this idea of what's going to happen next, but you will have to deal with issues of that sort of that universality, like what is driving these characters, what is making them do the things that they're doing, you know, why is it important to me, the reader? How do I empathize and resonate with these experiences? That will be important. But there are definitely works that lean a little bit more towards plot, and those that lean a little bit more towards character. I did notice, you know, slightly that Professor Mark Farnell seems a little. He seems Anglo to me. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Quite true. Yes, sir. Yes.
But he has a little bit of Indian diction. So
okay, that is my fault here.
Yeah, but I would prefer to see him be Indian myself. I mean, going back a little bit to Write What You Know, I think that this, you know, this an Indian Nobel laureate at Stanford, for me, is a more interesting and unique character than another, you know, Professor Mark Farnell. You know, Professor Mark Farnell does not too much for me. You know, you have to do much more work to make him interesting for me. You know. So that's, I might suggest that, but I'm fascinated with where you're going to go. Are you a physicist?
No, I'm a doctor. I'm a pediatrician.
Oh, okay. I think that this aspect of quantum physics is really fascinating, right? Particles are in two places at once.
Yes.
Okay, this is somewhat mind blowing, right?
Yes.
So. And are you like I mean, I actually do quite a bit of research into physics, because the physical world is obviously what we're dealing with as writers, and I try to understand it as best I can, and physics is one of the ways for us to understand it, as is biology, right? I imagine you're doing a little research into these physical phenomena.
I mean, I'm a pediatrician. I have a hospital. I'm quite busy, but during weekends, I did 2 months of research. I finished my novel. The novel is over, but
so now you're working on the rewrite of the novel.
Just making sure. I mean, it should be more readable. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's a wonderful world. And I know that, you know, your work is difficult and very stressful, and I mean, it goes again to this idea, like, I really do believe, you know, it's the same for readers and it's the same for writers. So my world is stressful. I got a lot to do, and I love to write. I love to be in this world where I can imagine these things and concoct and, you know, do all my little machinations.
Yes.
And it's also true for, you know, the reader, and you're, you know, I know you're coming out of a lot of stress, and I think it's great that you're finding this world to construct, and now let's keep working on it.
Absolutely.
My big advice in the novel that I know very well was back in 2000, I wrote a 600-page novel, and I was like, I'm done. I've hit the lottery. And I'm like, I don't think so. So like I've taken away that, you know, the way to look at it that's better for us, you know, it's sort of like running a marathon. You're like, after the first mile, you're like, I'm done, I won. It's like, no, you ran the first mile. Yeah. You got 23 more miles to run. So just realizing that everything now can start to build. You can look at everything and work on it. You can move things around and just start really bringing that story to life more and more. Sure. Yeah. That's what we end up doing. It's sort of like you actually have the great structure behind you, but I do think of it as architecture and relief. It's sort of like, okay, we get the block up there, and now we have to start scraping it away and bringing that story up to the surface more and more, bring out more and more contrasts and make it more dramatic. Yeah, but yeah, it's a wonderful beginning, and I look forward to seeing more.
Absolutely. Thanks, Otis. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Advaita. I really have to sign off, but great. I mean, of course, the feedback was absolutely great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for
absolutely.
Thank you for submitting.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
So, how many pieces do we have left pending, Otis, that that are pushed to next week? 2. Okay.
2. I think Jay and
Aditya, I think.
Hey, Jay, also maybe I can. Hey, Jay, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, Jay, I was going to say that there was I noted in your piece a little bit of a repeat. So if you wanted to work on that or clear it up a little bit, I'm happy to read something else again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. I don't know if you read the body of the email. I mentioned that I have, the second part of the story that I'm writing is what I've submitted for this week. But just to give a sense of continuity, I have copy-pasted my submission from the last week, the first part. So that is what you would have seen as
okay. Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Man, I don't read emails. What do you? I don't have that kind of time. No, I'm kidding, Jay. I guess I didn't read the email.
Yeah.
Okay. Well. Okay. Then we know what's happening. We'll talk about that next week. And if you want to keep going, I think you're in the midst of writing it. So why don't you just keep writing, and you can submit something else short too, and I can hopefully read that, and we'll see how many pieces we have.
Sure.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you all. That was a very spirited discussion today. Deep stuff.
Thank you, Otis. Thank you.
This was great. Thank you, Otis, and thank you everyone for submitting your pieces. Please do take the feedback into account. And if you want to send in revised, modified pieces, or if you want to send new pieces, by all means, please do so. All authors are welcome, old ones, young ones, very young ones also.